Hello and welcome to 168 Hours. I'm Razmik Martirosyan and my today's guest is Rahul Singh, Executive Director of Global Medic Canada. Thank you so much for being here.
No, thanks for having me. I just literally flew overnight and arrived in the country.
Yeah, you've been visiting Armenia with a humanitarian group for the fifth year in a row.
Actually, a little bit longer. We've worked in Armenia since 2016. I guess that was the 4-day war, and then we were back working in 19, to assist villages in the Artsakh region then, and then 20 when the war started, we were doing more assistance. And then, look, we're a little worried about those families that have come because there's not a lot of resources for them, or not enough resources for them. And we've been fortunate enough to get some funding, and we've been back to support those families almost for a year now, and we're going to keep going. We're going to be here until probably September, October at least now, and we're going to keep trying to get more funding to help.
What are the main areas of your work?
So think of us as an emergency response agency, right? Armenia is the 89th country we've worked in, so we've worked in a lot of places, and we would do everything from getting people clean drinking water to medical care to getting them emergency food to running drone programming, to identify where fires are, or where people have moved to flood response. There's a lot of stuff we do. But here in Armenia right now, like early on, when I described it early on, we were getting families, these family emergency kits. So you can imagine it would be a box, and inside the box would be a point of use water purification unit. Uses gravity, no electricity. Mom can take her dirty water, pour it in the top. Gravity pulls it through and stores clean water at the bottom, so the kids have clean water. We'd give hygiene items and a solar light. That's the basis of a lot of our programming. But right now, we're giving food hampers as well to the families that have fled the Artsakh region and are all over the country, right? Like not just in Yerevan, but everywhere. So we're providing them with food aid because we know at times tough for them, right? It's hard for them to pay rent. Where's their money coming from? So if we can give them food staple items like buckwheat and rice and other items that they can cook with, they can save that money to spend on other things.
How do you assess the situation compared to the previous years?
It's interesting. It's a tough assessment, and I'm going to change my answer for you just a little bit. I want to compare it to other places, right? Because look, you have about 165,000 people have fled that region, and about 115,000 have come into the country, right? So 115,000 into a country of like 3 million, and the bulk of them into the Yerevan region. This overwhelms local resources and local capacity, right? Like think of our country, Canada. We were so proud to welcome 75,000 Syrian refugees, about a decade ago. And we did that over the course of 1 year. And we're a nation of 35 million. So like over 10 times bigger than here population-wise, and our GDP would be bigger. You had to welcome these people in the course of what, like 1 week? I mean, it's going to overwhelm systems. So I think if you look at the impact of what happened, it speaks volumes of the Armenian people and how resilient they are, because you've rallied together to help, right? Like you've punched way above your weight. I mean, like when you just make those comparisons of like a nation like ours and the number of people we receive, and we don't even do that good of a job of receiving them or helping them, you've done really well with it. But I do think a lot of these families have needs, and do they have a durable solution? Like, are they going to get to go home? I don't know. That's a tough one. And if they're not, what's their future going to look like? Can they get jobs? Can they work in other areas? Like, I'm a little worried when I see your youth unemployment rate at like 19%. I mean, that's pretty high. So what's the future hold for people that had to leave everything behind?
In your observation, what their basic needs now?
Well, look, everyone's always got like the basic needs. Think of Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, right? You can survive 3 minutes without oxygen, right? You can survive 3 days without clean water. So clean water is a basic need. You're a developed country, you've got clean water in most places. Maybe some of the villages, lack it, but definitely in the cities you have it. But clean water would be one of them in the villages. How long are you going to go without food? 3 weeks max? Like, it's the rule of threes with Maslow. So that basic needs there. Access to healthcare. So I'd say food's a critical one. The access to healthcare, mental health support. Can you imagine what it would be like? I don't know if you're married. I don't know if you got kids, but could you imagine? Like, just think of your mom. If your mom had to grab you when you were little and just walk away from everything because of shelling in a war and just, or an oppressive action, how is that going to impact you? How traumatized would you be? And what's it going to impact to her? So how do you get her over that? And then just what does the future look like? So our focus is on the front end of those needs, right? That clean drinking water and food.
Do you cooperate with other like humanitarian organizations or groups?
Yeah, you know what? It's important to leverage partners and be partners. Like, one thing's clear, I don't speak Armenian, and we're doing this interview in English, right? So I'm going to be kind of useless working in Armenia if I don't have local partners, right? Another thing's pretty certain, like if you look at AMAA or, the Gurgen Malikian Foundation, these are all groups we work with, right? They know the community. They know the people. Like, in the case of Gurgen and his team, they've been helping families from the Artsakh region since 1994, right? That's like 30 years. In the case of AMAA, same thing. Like, they even had, a base that got expropriated as well. So it's important to work with lots of groups. And one interesting thing about Armenia that I didn't know, I didn't understand the impact of it, right? Because we have a lot of Armenians in our country, in Canada, but your diaspora is so big, but the community is so tight-knit that there's lots of opportunity to leverage and partner. Like, I guarantee you, like, if you think of the people that are helping us back in Canada, like our friend Corin, for example, he gives everything he can to help, and he'll always find someone in a network that can get us something that we need. Like, if I need to know someone in logistics, he can help us find it, because you've got these networks in the country. So absolutely, working through partners is key.
Yeah, so you're working with Armenian diaspora in Canada.
Yeah, so the Armenian diaspora in Canada is fascinating, right? They're kind of in three main pockets, right? Like from the West Coast in Vancouver all the way to Montreal, where I actually grew up, to Toronto, where I live now, and I've lived for 20 odd years. The Toronto diaspora is the main groups that we work with, and they're tight-knit and fantastic, and they care. And I remember when we first started working together almost a decade ago with the 4-day war in 2016, when we were giving them assistance, and they would help get it in and get it out to the village, just getting people clean drinking water. And then, in 19, again, helping those villages, right? These are all things we did in partnership. We were the technical experts, the aid providers, providing the products. They were the people who knew the people in need and could get it there. So it makes sense, right? Like, it's all about supply chains and getting the assistance out. We have a phrase that we live by, like, a call to action, right? Right aid, right people, right time. Well, we want to make sure that we get the right aid out, but it's the diaspora groups, right, that really know about who the right people are, and of course the right time is now.
So you're working basically on Artsakh Armenians issues, right? Or maybe there are other areas of your cooperation out there?
Well, right now the primary focus is on the displaced folks that have been forcibly removed from the Artsakh region, and we're just trying to get them the assistance. But even today, I was in a meeting where we're talking about pitching other ideas, the idea of vertical farming or soap recycling to help with some economic development that could help other regions of the country, or target folks, like just to help get them jobs while creating a product, like whether it's produce and growing it locally, then that produce can be used to feed, impoverished folks or people that are having a hard time. Because I understand, Armenia, like our country, is in a massive issue with the rising cost of living. Like your home prices and your rents have just skyrocketed in recent years. So, and we face that as well. And a lot of people are getting squeezed out because I was surprised how expensive your food costs are. Like, if I walk into a store here, I'm paying the same price that I'm paying in Toronto, and I would have thought your food costs would be lower. So I'm surprised, because just yesterday I was in Moldova, right, visiting our programs there, and we're pretty much in a very similar region. Like, we're not that far apart, but Moldovan food pricing is a lot lower than
Even
Armenia.
in Ukraine, they are complaining when they are coming to Armenia that the prices here are really crazy.
Yeah, it's funny. You can be in the middle of a war zone, like a very oppressive war, and your food costs are lower there. Like, there's something wrong with the market. So if we can offer programs to help grow locally, that can help. So that's beyond the work with just the folks that are displaced from Artsakh, but our main focus is to get them the assistance they need right now.
So you have like this kind of help everywhere, like in 89 countries, you mentioned?
Yeah, so we've worked in 89 countries. It's a lot of countries. And we've run about 260 odd operations, like missions into those 89 countries. Like, look, we're fortunate, and we're really grateful, and we're really proud of the fact that we've helped over 5.5 million people. Like that's a good thing, right? We want to keep putting zero after that. But look, I think what your viewers should know is that last year in 2024, there were 363 million people in need around the world, right? And that number was 61 million in 2010. Like that's 600% increase in like 14 years. That's horrible. The money to keep up with that it hasn't. There's like a widening gap between needs and then, the money to keep up with it. And just look what's happened to you guys in that period since 2010, right? How many more Armenians are in need? Like you've got the forcible displacement, right? So right away, the 165,000 from there. I guarantee you have more people that are kind of suffering because of the economy. They're getting squeezed out of the housing market that can't afford rent, right? Like you're going to have more people in trouble now economically than you did 15 years ago. So these are global trends that are quite concerning, and we're seeing it in multiple countries. Like I'm not saying it's just happening in Armenia. It's happening in my backyard where I live. It's certainly happening in just where I was yesterday in Moldova.
Are you in touch with Armenian government or Armenian governmental organizations?
Right now the work that we're doing is not through the Armenian government. It's more with like local NGOs and kind of international agencies, and then we try to leverage partners in, and then obviously shipping agencies and different, supply chain providers, and then we want to actually help the Armenian economy as well. So think of this, like when our agency buys food and food hampers, just imagine a box, right? And inside the box would be staple items that we know Armenians love to eat, right? Buckwheat, rice, grains, right? And we put this in a box, we give it to a family. The idea is to save them the costs, right? But if we buy that product in the local market, do you see how we contribute to GDP? Do you see how we're helping the jobs of the people packing that food, the jobs of the people working in those stores, the jobs of the people making those boxes? So it's important for us to really buy local to help local.
What humanitarian programs do you see lacking in Armenia? I mean, in the context of displaced people from Nagorno-Karabakh, from Artsakh.
It's a tough one because I don't want to sound like too much of a critic, because I'm not an expert on that conflict 100%. I can see that you have this nexus coming where what's next for those folks, right? Like look, I completely get it. You had a lot of influx of people fleeing that war in Russia that didn't want to get drafted into the army. So they came here and your housing prices went up, right? Yeah. Now you get, and that was probably 500,000 people. Then you get 165,000 people coming in, so your prices are going to go up, and there's so much more demand, right? So if it's too expensive for people to live, are you resettling them somewhere else? But what's their future look like, right? So if you can have decent economic development thinking about them, right? So what could that look like? Soap production programs, vertical farms, changing the way you grow food to try and get food prices lower by having it local. I mean, you're a landlocked country, right? You've got some logistics obstacles. So I think if there could be more of a focus onto that economic development model that really helps people that are displaced, and it's not to say that that's lacking. It's not always thought of. I mean, look at our programming, right? I'm just trying to keep families fed right now, and I'm trying to switch gears to how do I keep them fed while giving them jobs to keep them fed? Let me just give you one example. In Ukraine, the war's been happening a little bit longer, right? Yeah. Third year of the war, or ending the third year. Well, there's 16 million people that have been displaced because of that fighting. That's a lot of people. That's bigger than your country, as you know, right? 7 million crossed the border and became refugees, but that's still 9 million people displaced inside that country, all women and children. Well, now, when I'm buying the food to give to those families, we feed about 50,000 families at a time in Ukraine, right? It's a lot. not enough in comparison to the 9 million that are in need, right? But we're hiring women to pack those food kits. You see how we're giving livelihoods? And we're hiring the women who are displaced, right? So if we can have more thoughts on that, like where you can get livelihoods in and get more money in to the families that are impacted and give them futures and opportunities, I think that's a great place to transition to.
Are you familiar with Armenian medical infrastructure, and how can you assess that?
I have a little bit of knowledge of the Armenian medical infrastructure, but not an extensive amount. Now, I'm a medical person by background and trade.
That's why I'm asking,
Yeah, no. So it's interesting because one of the things we're offering today, like when I was in an earlier meeting, was saying, hey, look, how do we help you with your medical, not your infrastructure side, but your supply management, or just helping you to lower costs so you can redirect those costs to to other things. Like, so let me give you an example. Globally, I think you see that everybody bought too many things during COVID-19. So too many gloves, too many masks, too many other stuff. So it would be crazy for you to buy more of this stuff if you can get it donated. So I've got, believe it or not, 10, 20 sea containers worth of medical gloves that will expire in a couple of years that we're trying to now donate into hospitals here. So if a container costs, let's say, $50,000, $60,000 US, like that's a lot of money here, right? Like we're not talking a small amount. And we've got multiples of that. So if I can get that in here into different medical systems, can you see how the money that was going to get targeted for those purchases could get reallocated into something else? These are some of the things and conversations that we're trying to have with local agencies to help them with their budgets by giving them a product that they need.
What are your future plans in general and particularly concerning to Armenia?
Look, we're a pretty responsive agency, right? Like we'll come into crisis zones as needed whenever there's an incident where we're needed. Now, I'm a little worried because in January, which we just started the year, right? We're like, 20 days into the year. We're going to have 7 ops just this month in January. If you extrapolate that out, that's 84 ops for the year. We normally run 16. A busy year's 20. 7 in the first month, like that's scary. Whether it's the LA wildfires, the war in Gaza, maybe the war in Gaza slows down now. There's a little bit of hope there. The change in what's happening in Syria, that war in Ukraine, all the refugee crisis from the spill out of the war in Ukraine. Can you see how Armenia kind of falls off the world stage? Do you know what I mean? Like with just ones that I just mentioned. Notice I didn't even mention any of the wars in Africa, right? Like it just, so I'm a little worried about, the force and the scale of what started this year. I know we've got to keep being prepared to respond. Like, we're about 9,000 strong in terms of our volunteers, our army of good, if you will, and wanting to get out there. We're going to keep being here in Armenia to help. We'll be here for several more months. We rotate volunteer teams in to keep our costs low and keep getting aid out. But I'm a little concerned of what's happening. And now we do have a new program that we focused and created where we fight wildfires and we provide equipment to you. Just think last year the Amazon was on fire. Just what happened in LA and 2 years ago in Canada. Man, our entire nation was on fire. So that programming seems to be scaling up as well. And then the number of people that are displaced because of war is at higher points now than even at World War II. So that scares me as well.
So you mentioned about Syria. Have you been there recently, like after the events there happened in December?
So I haven't been inside Syria since those events. And to be honest, we'd be killed if we were there beforehand.
That's why I'm asking.
Because we were running cross-border into other areas, right? The regime of Assad would never want us inside Syria. So we just like we work here, we leverage through partners. So we've got aid coming into the former regime held areas through partners. I could see us coming back in there. But there's so many folks that are on the periphery and the outside that are living in these hinterlands that really, really need assistance. We're still helping them. But it's very interesting to see that it's over 100 and something thousand Syrians have started to go back, right? Lebanon, Jordan, They're trying to get back. They want to reclaim and rebuild. Just like, imagine the families that left Artsakh. If they could get back, I imagine they'd want to.
Yeah, and my last question is about that. In your opinion, why do Azerbaijan's actions in Artsakh not receive a clear international assessment?
You know, it's interesting because I'm not an expert enough on, you know, why this occurred and what the rationale is. And as a humanitarian, we try to maintain a neutrality on getting in and getting access to help people, right? So much like I wouldn't, you know, comment on a government with Armenia had done something because it might prevent me. Could you imagine if there was an earthquake in Azerbaijan tomorrow? I'd want my teams to be there to save lives, right? And I wouldn't want to be obstructed. And just that thing I mentioned to you, being in Syria, when we took it aside and said, we're going to help people here, we couldn't get in on the other way. So it's one of those things where I have to be really careful of my thoughts and my comments, because if I prevented us from being able to respond to a place, there's a child or a vulnerable family that we didn't save and we could have, all because my comments. I just have to be careful with that.
Yeah.
I hope you can understand that.
I understand it. Yeah. Thank you so much for this interesting interview.
No, thanks for having me on.
And thank you so much for watching this interview. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.